Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. And I thought that I would, today's theme is going to be derangement. I'm going to be looking at all different kinds of derangement. But let's start with the number one news story of today. And this is from a person who styles themselves Elliot Page. It begins, "Hi friends, I want to share with you that I am trans. My pronouns are he, they, and my name is Elliot. I feel lucky to be writing this, to be here, to have arrived at this place in my life. I feel overwhelming gratitude for the incredible people who have supported me along this journey. I can't begin to express how remarkable it feels to finally love who I am enough to pursue my authentic self. I've been endlessly inspired by so many in the trans community. Thank you for your courage, your generosity, and ceaselessly working to make this world a more inclusive and compassionate place. I will offer whatever support I can and continue to strive for a more loving and equal society. I also ask for patience. My joy is real, but it is also fragile. The truth is, despite feeling profoundly happy right now and knowing how much privilege I carry, I am also scared. I'm scared of the invasiveness, the hate, the jokes, and of violence. To be clear, I am not trying to dampen a moment that is joyous and one that I celebrate, but I want to address the full picture. The statistics are staggering. The discrimination towards trans people is rife, insidious, and cruel, resulting in horrific consequences. In 2020 alone, it has been reported that at least 40 transgender people have been murdered, the majority of which were Black and Latinx trans women. To the political leaders who work to criminalize trans healthcare and deny our right to exist, and to all those with a massive platform who continue to spew hostility towards the trans community, you have blood on your hands. You unleash a fury of vile and demeaning rage that lands on the shoulders of the trans community, a community in which 40% of trans adults report attempting suicide. Enough is enough. You aren't being canceled. You are hurting people. I am one of those people, and we won't be silent in the face of your attacks. I love that I am trans, and I love that I am queer. And the more I hold myself close and fully embrace who I am, the more I dream, the more my heart grows, and the more I thrive. To all trans people who deal with harassment, self-loathing, abuse, and the threat of violence every day, I see you, I love you, and I will do everything I can to change this world for the better. Thank you for reading this. All my love, Elliot." So, who is Elliot Page? Well, Elliot Page was known until today as Ellen Page. And this person is an actress. Amusingly, Wikipedia was Johnny on the spot, changing all manner of things about the entry. Let's see, Page came out as gay in February 2014 and subsequently as transgender and non-binary in December 2020, specifying his pronouns as he, him, and they, them, and announcing his new name, Elliot Page. Page was born and raised in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He was assigned female at birth and went by the birth name of Ellen until December 2020. This is a typical millennial disaster story. His parents are Martha Philpotts, a teacher, and Dennis Page, a graphic designer. So originally, this person was called Ellen Grace Philpotts Page, and you might have thought that, oh, I see, it's one of those aristocratic families with the double-barreled name. No, it is something different. It is a man and a woman get married, and I'm not going to change my surname and have my identity erased. But wait a minute, isn't that your father's name? Never mind that. But no, our child is going to have a double-barreled name with the mother's name first. There is a picture on the Wikipedia page of the then Ellen Page, in 2020, looking very female indeed. But this was all an accident, wrongly assigned at birth. What else do we know from this woman, according to Wikipedia? He attended the Halifax Grammar School until grade 10, spent some time at Queen Elizabeth High School, and graduated from the Shambhala School in 2005. So there's a list of roles here, and I'm trying to think of the movies that I've seen this person in. I saw Juno, which was a movie that was so inane, so vile, that it led me to briefly consider self-harm before I realized, well, I could forget this movie. I saw this person in Inception, which is stupid movie where nothing makes any sense. And it's a terrible interpretation of what the dream world is like. And it also features a battle in the snow between dozens of people all dressed in white, so you don't know who's who. And this seems to go on for about 30 minutes. So, yeah, that is the entirety of my knowledge of this person's work. But more about Elliot. Page attended a Buddhist school in his youth and practiced meditation and yoga. He practices a vegan lifestyle, and PETA named him and Jared Leto the sexiest vegetarians of 2014. He is an atheist, having remarked that religion, quote, has always been used for beautiful things and also as a way to justify discrimination, unquote. He describes himself as a pro-choice feminist. In February 2014, Page came out as gay during a speech at the human rights campaign Time to Thrive conference in Las Vegas. This cri de coeur from the now Elliot Page, you notice that there are two modes. There is the mode of trans is wonderful, trans is truth, trans is dream and love, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then we get into trans is horrifying, absolutely horrifying. A community in which 40% of trans adults report attempting suicide. Why would one be so eager to join a community in which 40% report attempting suicide? I suspect a lot of those reports are simply made up, but the suicide rate of transgender people is exceedingly high, nonetheless. In 2020 alone, it's been reported that at least 40 transgender people have been murdered, the majority of which were Black and Latinx trans women. I wonder how many of these people were working as prostitutes and how many of them were not exactly forthcoming about, let's say, the state of their genitals. Murder is a bad thing, certainly, but how many people are killed, murdered in the United States every year? 15, 20,000, something like that. It doesn't seem like that many. You'll notice that there's not much in the way of detail here about this transformation. Is Elliot Page taking testosterone? Has Elliot Page had top surgery like Chaz Bono? Has Elliot Page had a, what do they call it? I remembered it a few minutes ago. Phalloplasty? Yeah, I believe that's what it's called. Essentially, it is an attempt to create a ersatz penis. But no, there's none of that in there. And as Unwoke Duffy commented, being trans isn't even about a woman feeling as if she's a man, as this makes clear. There is not even any mention of her newfound or long suppressed sense of maleness, because there is none. She likes and wants to join an oppressed minority community. Simple as. Given that masculinity is so very toxic, as we are reminded every day, wouldn't this have been something of a problem for Elliot Page? You think so? Just a little. One might have expected something in her cri de coeur about how she was going to strive and probably fail, but continue to striving to absolve or to erase all traces of toxicity in her own masculinity. But no, there is nothing about that as well. And I brought this up before, but this is a question which the trans people and the supporters of trans, the gender affirmative crowd, cannot answer. When Ellen Page announced that she was a lesbian, we were instructed that this condition was immutable. Now that Ellen has become Elliot and is transgender, is this new condition immutable as well? Now remember what immutable means. It means it can't be changed. Yes, lesbianism is not a choice. And it is outrageous, disgusting, a hate crime to suggest otherwise. But so here we had this woman who was very strongly identified as a lesbian, and that has been abandoned now because now this person is a man. So is it possible that that identity might shift as well? When we're talking about gender non-binary people, it seems that gender as well as gender expression are very much on a spectrum, very much not immutable. But I was looking at Elliot Page's CV, and let's see the latest work from this artiste. The Umbrella Academy, again from Wikipedia, it's an American superhero streaming television series based on the, wait for it, comic book series of the same name written by Gerard Way. Created for Netflix by Steve Blackman and developed by Jeremy Slater, it revolves around a dysfunctional family of adopted sibling superheroes who reunite to solve the mystery of their father's death and the threat of an impending apocalypse. Yeah. The Umbrella Academy is set in a universe where 43 women around the world give birth simultaneously on October the 1st, 1989, despite none of them showing any sign of pregnancy until labor began. Ooh. 7 of the children are adopted by eccentric billionaire Sir Reginald Hargreaves and turned into a superhero team that he calls the Umbrella Academy. Hargreaves gives the children numbers rather than names, but they are eventually named by their robot mother, Grace, as Luther, Diego, Allison, Klaus, 5, Ben, and Vanya. While putting 6 of his children to work fighting crime, Reginald keeps Vanya apart from her siblings' activities as she supposedly demonstrates no powers of her own. I'm going to guess that her powers, Vanya's powers, are greater by far than any of the others. I'm just going to step out on a limb here. What else is Elliot Page starring in? Isn't this going to present something of a problem? Because if we had someone playing a female character who is now a male, so we're going to have someone playing a male playing a female character, because as you probably have heard, this has become an issue in Hollywood. Typically, transsexual characters are not played by transsexuals for a very obvious reason, that people in the movies are supposed to be good looking. So this is appropriation, we're told, and it's wicked and it has to stop. So doesn't this mean that Elliot Page will now be forced to play only male roles? And what is Elliot Page's? Oh, I see that in Tales of the City, which of course is a remake of something that played on PBS decades ago. Elliot Page's character is Shauna Hawkins, Mary Ann and Brian's adopted daughter. Here's the premise of Tales of the City, which gives you an idea. This is on Netflix too, which gives you an idea of the state of pause TV. Mary Ann Singleton refers to 28 Barbary Lane in San Francisco after a 23-year absence for the 90th birthday of her former landlady, Anna Madrigal. What? So her former landlady was celebrating her 90th birthday, so she went to see her for this and then was gone for 23 years? All right. Mary Ann is happily reunited with Michael Tolliver and Anna, but what? But things are more complicated when her ex-husband, Brian Hawkins, and Shauna, the daughter she left behind to pursue a broadcasting career. Shauna follows a mysterious attraction to a new girl in town who is making a documentary. Everything is meta with these people. About 28 Barbary Lane, the relationship between transgender man Jake Rodriguez and his lesbian girlfriend Margot Park faces challenges as Jake explores his newfound attraction to men. Michael struggles with the option to stop using condoms now that he is in a relationship with Ben Marshall, who is on PrEP. Anna begins receiving mysterious letters threatening to expose a secret from her past. What could that secret possibly be that would be any crazier or more depraved than anything that is in this premise? Ellen Page, this has not seemed very happy for quite a long time, actually. He grew their hair out and has looked gaunt and rather haunted. This person became viral last year. I'll read from Time Magazine. Ellen Page, dead naming Time Magazine. You got to go back and fix all these pages. Had an urgent message about the dangers of hate for viewers at home during a late night appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. The Umbrella Academy actress pulled no punches when it came to calling out the Trump administration in an impassioned speech where she told Colbert that she was really fired up. During her interview with Colbert, Page sounded off on environmental racism and how climate change disproportionately affects communities of color the most. This is something that's happening, and it's happening to the most marginalized people, and we need to be talking about it, she said. It's really serious. She later addressed the rise of homophobia and the rise in hate crimes, including the recent attack on actor Jussie Smollett, who said he was assaulted by two masked men who put a rope around his neck and shouted homophobic and racist insults at him. Page said, the urgency is so severe, and yet we have a media that's barely talking about it. That's not how I remember it. We have a media that's saying it's a debate whether or not what just happened to Jussie Smollett is a hate crime. It's absurd. This shit isn't a debate. Yeah, it's a debate now, a legal debate, which has already cost Jussie Smollett his TV role. Page then pointed to the anti-alphabet people policies of Donald Trump and Mike Pence and others in position of power for their role in hateful acts such as this. She said, this is what happens if you're in a position of power and you hate people and you want to cause suffering to them. You go through the trouble. You spend your career trying to cause suffering. What do you think is going to happen? Kids are going to be abused and they're going to kill themselves. People are going to be beaten on the street. I should point out that Ellen Page has a very unpleasant, Elliot Page. This is going to take some getting used to. It's a very, very unpleasant voice. Apparently, for decades now, it's been no longer a concern of Hollywood of what the actors and actresses sound like. So many of the women just have screechy, unpleasant voices, and I'm just constantly amused that Ryan Reynolds, another Canadian, gets to be an action hero with that face, gay face, they call it, and that voice. How did this happen? Of course, I'm reminded sadly of the death of Corey Haim, another Canadian. And someone made a very bitter joke at the time of his death that if you looked at his death certificate, it would list the cause of death as America. We also see, this is from HuffPost, in the section Queer Voices, again from last year, Ellen Page calls out Chris Pratt for supporting infamously anti-alphabet people church. Young, hip evangelical churches like Zoe and Hillsong have attracted a slew of celebrity followers while being privately unsupportive of same-sex marriage. And there is a picture of what was then Ellen Page looking remarkably drawn for a 32-year-old. Page pointed out that Pratt, who spoke out of his church on The Late Show Thursday night, didn't mention that it didn't appear to be affirming of queer relationships. Pratt and a number of other Christian celebrities, Justin and Hailey Bieber, Kylie and Kendall Jenner, Selena Gomez, have become closely associated with hip, youth-oriented evangelical churches like Hillsong, a mega church with locations around the world, and Zoe Church, a newer Los Angeles-based church that was modeled after Hillsong. While churches like Zoe and Hillsong often claim to be welcoming alphabet people, ultimately, many still hold conservative Christian views about marriage, meaning they do not support queer relationships or same-sex marriages. In an early morning tweet on Friday, Page wrote that his church is infamously anti-alphabet people, so maybe address that too. She was on a one-person mission to rid the world of hatred. I don't know. I don't think it's going to end well for the now Elliot Page. I've noticed, I've talked about this before, I've noticed that people who are not Black and not Southern have become very fond of the contraction y'all. And I found a particularly good example. There's a woman called Evie Kwong, who is an editor, social and audience, whatever that means, at the Toronto Star. She's a podcaster. She describes herself as an eater. I never would have guessed. Oh, Mariah Karaoke. Yes, very serious person. Very serious person. Now, this person who is in the media became a part of a story. I'll read from Blog TO. The owners of trendy new athletic apparel store Permission are ending their partnership with Right Nutrition, a company that's been hosting a broth bar pop-up inside their store, following countless complaints of cultural appropriation from community members. Countless complaints. The pop-up opened inside the store at 127 Ossington Avenue earlier this month and has been selling superfood bone broth and other wellness items, but many have been raising their eyebrows at the fact that a company owned by a white woman, boo, is selling bone broth, hot sauce, and other foods from different cultures. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to walk around where I live, and every place that I find which is run by Chinese people or Korean people or people from South Asia that are selling pizza or hamburgers, that sort of thing, I'm going to tell them to stop. I'm going to tell them to stop engaging in cultural appropriation. We have our own food here, and who are you to prepare it for us? Absolutely outrageous. Right Nutrition's founder, Alexandra Baer, did not respond to Blog TO's request for comment. Toronto Star editor Evie Kwong is one of the community members that's been extremely outspoken about the issue this week, posting a lengthy Twitter thread Wednesday in which she pointed out that the company is white-owned. Boo! Is selling bone broth, jerk sauce, faux hot sauce, and superfood dumplings. Here's a tweet from her, November the 18th. A white-owned trendy spot on Ossington is selling bone broth across from the Golden Turtle Faux, also sexualizing jerk sauce and faux hot sauce and making superfood dumplings for profit. Y'all, I'm sick. Once again, y'all, I'm sick. You're Chinese. You're not Black. You're not Southern. Give it a rest. The cultures they are taking from literally fight daily for legitimacy. The wellness cleansing of the food, the lack of historical understanding, and the number of followers is alarming. I'm not trying to knock small businesses, but damn, This one hurts. Doesn't she mean damn? Doesn't she mean that? Kwong added that Permission is located across from Golden Turtle. So, a restaurant that has been serving authentic pho and Vietnamese cuisine since 1987 and has been struggling to survive amid the pandemic. Yeah, and I wonder whether these authentic Vietnamese at the Golden Turtle are actually Vietnamese and not Chinese, as so many of the Vietnamese refugees that were settled in Canada turned out to be. Kwong also pointed out that Right Nutrition's marketing, which includes hot sauces called jerk meat and hot faux you, and refers to their broth bar as a brothel, effectively sexualizes these traditional foods. I legit threw out my Chinese food lunches because white kids would make fun of it all day. Would they now? Really? Given that Chinese food has been mass marketed in North America since at least the 1950s. I bought into Pizza Day and dry ass turkey burgers. Oh, okay. Adjective, ass, noun. Again, black people speak. You are not black. So did many others, and now you are taking our culture and selling it. Self-awareness level 0. And people think it's legit. Damn, she added. Yeah. So I was looking at her Twitter account last night, and just remarkable. Oh, here's one from today. Many women of color are the ones calling out inequities and always told to just deal with it. Really? Is that what happens, Evie? That angry women are told to just deal with it? Like, on top of having to call and fix shit they have to endure, the emotional toll, fear of violent threats, often alone. Oh, yes. A mentor. Like I said before, I'm so grateful Shri Pradkar, who's someone I can turn to receive guidance and support with this. Those before us did so much with nothing in place, and we can still see that companies will still deny putting POC women in danger while offering no support. Let's see. And I just, all of the blackisms in her Twitter account, there just seems to be a natural pull to all immigrants in my country now towards black culture. That you see young Asian people, East Asian, South Asian, in their cars with the rap music blaring out of it, with their what they imagine to be black clothing styles, etc., etc. I wonder who they think they are fooling. I don't know, that they're not fooling me. Shri Pradkar, of course, is not Canadian. She was born and raised and educated in India. Then she moved to Singapore, where apparently it did not work out for her. And she has been in Canada for about 10 or 15 years and being promoted, highly promoted, for telling us how terrible we are. Oh, and at those Asians that still need to fulfill the model minority myth, let's not. Well, no, there's no such thing as model minorities. And of course, she's terrified by COVID-19 because, of course, she is. Of course, she is. But I guess we're going to see more and more and more of this y'all. Oh, and she has an overweight cat. That's another shocker, too. I never would have imagined that. Never. Not in a million years. Okay. So let's have a look at the chat. Bar is deep state, says British American, not blackpilling, but this is discouraging as hell. I'll be getting to that shortly. Chocokin666 says, took my mask off for a few minutes walking my dogs because my glasses were all fogged up. Wild Karen appears and starts berating me. Depressed, not because people are stupid and credulous, but because they feel they have the right to inculcate their BS all up in your space. Brother Obstreperous says, love the Elliot Rogers page meme. I hadn't seen that. I will have to investigate that. Jim Smith says, the strangest thing I've heard about in a while. Was there anything masculine about her? She was definitely getting more masculine in her presentation. I've noticed this. Look at Rachel Maddow is an excellent example of this. You see pictures of her graduation pictures at university, and she looks feminine. But you get a change. Female faces are much more mobile than male faces. That's one of the ways that you can tell women from men. When boys and girls are children, they act much the same. Very mobile faces, exaggerated modes of speaking, sort of flamboyant body language. But boys, typically, or used to at any rate, the new male grimace. Men have never learned that, to tone it down. But what you see with lesbians is that they have an increasingly masculine affect in their face. I was talking about the first female coach in the NFL, not a head coach, of course, but I could not believe that this was actually a woman. And as I said yesterday, 99 out of 100 people or more would say, no, that's a man. Okay, what else do we have here in the chat? Yo Mama says Ellen Page needs an exorcist. Jogokin 666 again. Can't they just be satisfied with the septum piercing? Assigned female at birth, says President Barbican. Yeah, that's a really hard one to pull off, especially since Abigail Schreier points out in her book Irreversible Damage, which I highly recommend, that it seems that almost none of this new wave of female-to-male transsexuals has reported what they call gender dysphoria. It seems to come up out of the blue. Brother Ostreper says, demoniacs try to flip the script. Instead of submitting to purification rituals, they try to submit normal people to their humiliation rituals. That's quite good. Matthew Carpenter says, are you going to review the Transgender Industrial Complex by Scott Howard? Perhaps, but I don't want to talk about another book on that subject right now because it is disgusting and depressing. Palpicasso 88 says Christopher Nolan is the most overrated director of the 21st century. I saw that Rich on Red Letter Media was, I suppose he was asked to, qualify Christopher Nolan's movies, and he said that they were loud, which I thought was amusing. Thomas Henderson says, God have mercy on your soul if you watch many Canadian movies. Are there Canadian movies? Back when I had cable, I noticed that the Canadian cable companies would play Canadian movies, which were obviously, all filmed with government grants of $30,000 or whatever, and they typically show these films at like 3 or 4 or 5 in the morning. There's no Canadian film industry to speak of. Even what was the CBC? Does it even produce things anymore? Chad Chadson says, I don't want to know how the sausage is made. Polygon says no one cares about her anymore. I don't think that that's true. I mean, she is on 2 programs simultaneously, and she keeps getting movie work. She's doing quite well. Dan Ellison says 1.5 million unborn babies were murdered in the same period just in the U.S. British American says Paige was in Trailer Park Boys. It's a show that I have never watched. Wasn't it kind of the Canadian equivalent of The Bill or Casualty, that every Canadian actor appeared in it. I mean, every Canadian actor who hadn't decamped to the United States. She's internalized the patriarchy, says Adam. Thomas Henderson again. Now that a lesbian has become a man, can he do what is ordinarily anatomically impossible? Is that a big pen you wield? Yeah, it's a big pen. I'll tell you something about pens. That whenever I go looking to buy pens, I find that there seem to be two choices. That there's, you get the bag of pens, like 10 pens for $2.50, and all the other pens seem to cost $10, $15. And I'm thinking, is there nothing in between? Because these pens, I mean, you're lucky in a bag of 10 if you get 10 of them that work. And they're kind of messy as well. Hello to Jonathan Paul. Hello, Professor. Anran says Buckley didn't always use Bics. It's a bad habit to be fiddling with something, and I try to avoid it. Let's see. Contracu says the fact that this straight white male Elliot Page has been stealing roles from more deserving women of color all these years disgusts me. I think it's a problem that he is going to have to address. Enron says, I recently watched the documentary about Buckley and Gore Vidal. Amusing. One thing that's not so amusing was that Vidal sued Buckley. Vidal sued all sorts of people. He sued Oberon Waugh because Waugh called him a homosexual, if you can imagine that. And apparently Buckley, William Buckley, had built up an enormous dossier about Gore Vidal, including activities that are, shall we say, illegal. When Buckley died, Christopher Buckley came across this dossier and destroyed it. Project Veritas never has any impact, says Wandering Spurg. What would have any impact? This is a serious question. If there was, verified video of Joe Biden and his campaign team, and maybe Barack Obama could be in the same room at all, going into detail about how they intended to steal the election, would that make any difference? That is a serious question, because you see how the Hunter Biden story, with its very serious accusations that Joe Biden had sold out the United States of America to China and the Ukraine for money, was suppressed. It was almost entirely suppressed. Wandering Spurg says, what about Alanis Morissette? Well, she decamped for the United States when she was, 18, 19, whatever? She was what they call in Quebec a vedette. And I guess she'd got to the end of that. And you're not going to make very much money. You can't make any money in this country if you're only selling to Canadians. I suppose if you were the very biggest thing in the country. But for everyone else, no. You have to break it. You got to break in the United States, and a lot of bands drive themselves crazy trying to do this because they get told what to do, and it's not what they did that got them popular in Canada. I didn't know that Pratt's church was Hillsong, says Goose. This has got to stop at some point. Yes, as Herbert Stein famously said, if things cannot continue, they will stop. And in fact, I use that phrase today because, it's World AIDS Day. Happy World AIDS Day to everyone. I hope you've all indulged in your World AIDS Day celebrations, but I hope that they're certainly COVID safe. Oh, who else did I come across here? Someone called Ellen O, who is a young adult author who is Korean American. And guess what word I found her using? Why, that would be y'all. She tweeted November the 4th, When this is all over and you hear a nuclear shriek that echoes across the country, y'all will know that I finally released the 4 years of internal screams I've been holding in, and I finally exploded in relief. Yeah, okay. Antisocial, curmudgeonly writer of Young Adult and MG, I don't know what MG is, repped by Agent Zacher, can be bribed with donuts. Why is that supposed to be interesting? These people, I love coffee. Oh, really? That kind of surprises me because coffee isn't a very popular drink. Oh, and you like donuts, do you? Again, an odd and seemingly unpopular choice. What was trending on Twitter today? Start cis shaming. Yeah. Let's make fun of cis people. Let's shame them. And there are hundreds, thousands of tweets. Apparently this started as a joke on Reddit and then became serious. Oh, Clown Kanaya tweets, suicide/transphobia, start cis-shaming, UK trans teens are in danger. Hormone blockers may be banned for people under the age of 16. This could lead to mass suicide. Hormone blockers can be reversed. Really? Can they? Not so easy. Oh, and here's one with a picture of a bunch of men laughing. Did your effing mom pick your gender out for you? Could have been mom, could have been dad, could have been the doctor. Look down between the legs and there you go. That's normally how it works. Or, this is done with, photographs, internal photographs, long before a birth. But apparently, can you imagine what people were actually assigned gender at birth? Oh, man. It's like, what century are we living in? Since I'm talking about derangement, I want to talk about the December the 7th, 2020 cover of the New Yorker. And there is a young black woman, a light-skinned black woman. She's sitting on a chair in front of a laptop, and she is drinking some sort of a cocktail that is golden colored, perhaps you could say. Now, you don't get the full effect unless you open up the whole picture. If you look at her apartment is, squalor. Okay. She's got all these books stacked on her desk, and she's holding a mobile device while she is staring at the screen of her laptop. We see prescription drugs next to an empty carton of Chinese food. The floor is covered with Amazon delivery, some open, some not. There are 2 cats. There are surgical gloves on the floor, coffee cartons. It's just disgusting. There are 3 bottles of wine in a cupboard. And what is the message of this? Joe Gabriel Simonson said, is this cover intentionally dark? No, I don't think so. I don't think it's intentionally dark. I think it is supposed to be amusing in a kind of snarky way. That apparently 2020, it's just the worst, and just surviving is what it is all about. If you survive, that you should be proud of yourself. And of course, this woman, she's wearing a blouse, but she's wearing athletic shorts and slippers, and she has unshaven legs. So, but of course, assuming she's on a Zoom call, she can only be witnessed from the waist up, just as I can only be witnessed from the waist up. But you see, despite the squalor in which she lives, despite these terrible times, and I see a surgical mask which has been discarded on the floor. Oh, 2 surgical masks discarded on the floor, along with the surgical gloves. You see, she is keeping it together. She needs to be congratulated because, women have to work, 2, 3, 5 times as hard as men simply to stay in the same place. Yeah, I know. It's sad and it's certainly iniquitous, but there you have it. There you have it. And I suppose this woman is supposed to be an ideal. She must be an ideal, otherwise she wouldn't be on the cover of the New Yorker. So yes, start cis shaming. So some person, and I'm going to guess this is an Oriental female, in teens, with multicolored hair, and very, very thick eye makeup, which is on the nose as well and appears to be on the lips as well. A dog collar. You tell me you're cis, it says. Oh, look, there's a thread. Okay. Oh yeah, by the way, this is all jokes. A lot of my friends are cis and I love them. This was more aimed at normie sissies that are snowflakes. Okay. It's okay, Van is lonely. We can beat up the sissies together. Someone responded, Tumblr is down the hall to the left. Tumblr was never really my thing, but I think I had an Instagram when I was hardcore emo in like 8th grade. I have seen a lot of these start cis shaming tweets. I had little or no idea what message these people were attempting to put across, except, the photograph pretty much gives the game away. I am transgressive. I am so transgressive. I'm so transgressive that I'm into K-pop, which is the most artificial, tightly controlled music in the world. But that's how I express my individuality. So I'm going to have a quick look at the chat and move on to the next topic, which again, our theme today is derangement. Jonathan Pohl says, I don't even like it when Celtic people eat German-derived foods like hamburgers and frankfurters. No? Why not? I like to joke that when the Germans came to the United States after 1948, and of course this is something of an exaggeration, they brought music and hamburgers and frankfurters, which Americans like. They also brought communism, anarchism, and nihilism, which Americans don't like. Contracoup says, it's amazing how resistant to cognitive dissonance modern leftists are. I'm not sure it will end, even if we all, true believers included, end up in gulags. They can't. Look at Elliot Page. The fact that Chris Pratt has different views, or the church he attends has different views on proper sexuality than hers, throws her into a rage. If you watch the Stephen Colbert clip, she's bullying him. That he, after her opening tirade, she's like, oh yeah, because she looks like she is going to burst into tears or start screaming. I would have thought that just from the time that you were a child, from the time that you first gain consciousness, you realize that other people are different from you. Enron says, per that cover, the New Yorker sells for $9 an issue now. Good Lord. Jaco Raipawa, our Finnish friend, says Trump should just drop the whole legal stuff and announce that he identifies as the president-elect. I like that. That is good. That is good. Enron says, how many years has it been since the New Yorker has been any good? I couldn't speak to that. I know that Tom Wolfe wrote an infamous piece about the New Yorker circa 1967, and it was called Tiny Mummies. And it just caused a furor in the literary world, with all of these people, including Muriel Spark, rushing to the defense of the New Yorker. Muriel Spark had reason to be grateful because the New Yorker published her novel, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, in its entirety in the magazine. It is a short novel, but that's rather extraordinary, actually. I used to read a lot of literary magazines, a lot of magazines with, art sections, literary sections. But when it came to the New Yorker, I just got the impression that this magazine was telling me that this was not for me, that I simply didn't make the grade when it came to being a New Yorker reader. Is the stream lagging, or is it because I'm in my bunker? Well, no one else has complained. The Atlantic, at least, used to be quite good. Well, it was okay. It had some good stuff in it. Harper's was pretty interesting when Lewis Lapham was the editor. But no, it's all Orange Man bad now. And what are they going to fill up their magazines with? Okay, let's talk about, I'm always pleased when, I attempt an aphorism, metaphor, and other people pick up on it. Not that these people were influenced by me, but that it was, in the air, as it were. This is from LifeSite News. America is on the story by Leanne Lawrence. America is on the verge of being lost because many of its citizens are suffering from a delusional psychosis and so fearful that they are turning on each other to enforce nonsensical coronavirus restrictions, a California psychiatrist has warned. Dr. Mark McDonald said, "We don't need a police force. We don't need a secret Stasi to go after the neighbor that isn't wearing his mask on a park bench. We have families who are willing to do that. We have office workers who will come by and mace you if you are not wearing a mask, and no one will come to your rescue. In fact, they'll probably applaud it." A child and adolescent psychiatrist in private practice in West Los Angeles, Dr. McDonald made his remarks during the virtual Truth Over Fear Summit organized by Catholic broadcaster Patrick Coffin. "The driving force of the coronavirus pandemic and the hysteria around it is fear," McDonald said. "This fear has now grown and become so entrenched that it has reached a state of what I would call delusional psychosis. A delusion is a fixed false belief that is contrary to reality," he added. "Fear has become a new virtue. Never before in the history of this country have we told people that fear is good, or to settle into those fears and allow them to control and constrain your life," said McDonald, who spoke at the American Frontline Doctors White Coats Summits in July and October. Moreover, Americans, quote, "who are either afraid or have been fed lies and misinformation for months now, have grown to not only feel afraid, but also to believe that what they are being told is true, which is primarily that all of us are at equal risk of catching a virus and dying from it. This is demonstrably untrue. It's a lie, in fact. And we've known that it's a lie for about 6 months, and yet people have come to believe it," unquote. While there was a lot of infection from the coronavirus, there was very, very little death or hospitalization outside of very specific populations, McDonald said. Less than 1% of the population accounts for over 90% of all the deaths, which occur in people over age 70, mostly over age 80, with at least 2.5 to 3 comorbidities, according to the CDC. Other than that group of people, we are really not at risk of hospitalization or death in any meaningful way from this virus, certainly less than we are of standard influenza. More disturbingly, the pandemic hysteria has reached the stage of going beyond fear, going beyond the crazy itself, to what I would call group control, he said. As a result, Americans are policing themselves to such an extent that governments have dialed down enforcement of ongoing lockdowns and restrictions by multiple notches, he observed. During a recent flight on Delta Airlines, a furious flight attendant castigated me for drinking water for more than 3 minutes and continued to hound him throughout the flight, McDonald related. When the plane reached its destination, McDonald was escorted off and interviewed by a station manager. 2 weeks later, he received a letter from Delta banning him from flights in perpetuity or until the airline withdrew its mask mandate. Moreover, McDonald was later told by the person he was traveling with that all the passengers erupted into applause after he was escorted off the plane because their anxiety was relieved by me being punished for not appropriately wearing the mask as required, as demanded. During another flight, McDonald went to the galley for some water, and an attendant on her break offered to get him some, but was berated by an on-duty flight attendant for not wearing a mask. This colleague attacking colleague, passenger attacking passenger is a type of behavior I've never ever seen before. I was stunned, McDonald said. So the end result is this. What appears to me is a country which is using its own citizens as a de facto police force, very similar to communist China, that has a social point system in place where neighbor informs on neighbor, family informs on family. This has had a terribly damaging effect on our society. He said that while misinformation is a root cause of the pandemic hysteria, Americans are also at fault for their laziness about educating themselves. There is readily available information on all platforms of the internet, social media, that any reasonably intelligent and literate person can find and evaluate and critically analyze, he said. So widespread and rooted is this delusional psychosis that when I leave my home or leave my office every day, I have to prepare myself for the inevitable experience of what I would call the outdoor insane asylum. The experience reminds me of my time I spent in residency, where I would go through a locked unit door, the door shut behind me, and I'd have to remind myself that anyone not wearing a badge behind that door is crazy. Now I have to do the same when I'm out in public, because my assumption is that any person that I run into is insane. He warned that things could get much worse. With a positive outcome in the election, with the removal of those who wish to destroy the country and the election of those who wish to preserve it, we have a fighting chance, but we need a virtuous populace as well, not just a virtuous governing body. We need a people who believe in and cherish freedom as a virtue rather than fear. Never before in the history of this country has fear been enshrined as a virtue. If it starts this way and we don't address it and redress it, we are lost. I'm curious about his experiences on passenger airplanes. I don't fly very much, but I've noticed that the standards in care on airplanes have, collapsed. That the people who are the flight attendants, who are supposedly there to look after you and cater to you, seem to regard doing anything for you as exhausting and quite possibly intolerable. And now COVID-19 has given them the excuse to ignore you entirely. Airline travel, even before COVID-19, had become a nightmarish experience where everyone is treated as a terrorist, forced to strip or partially strip, remove everything from their pockets, etc., etc. One of the last times I flew, I was told to remove my shoes, and to take off my overcoat. And then, so they've checked me out. I'm good to go. And I have to put on my overcoat and I have to put on my shoes. And of course, there's nowhere to sit down. So there I am, sort of hopping up and down, hoping that I don't embarrass and possibly injure myself by toppling over doing this. And of course, none of the people involved in the security paid any attention to this at all. I suppose it was my own fault for wearing an overcoat and wearing shoes. From Breitbart, David Eng. Acclaimed playwright David Mamet has added his distinctive voice to the growing chorus of dissenters who are now questioning the effectiveness of government-mandated masks and lockdowns to combat the coronavirus. In a recent op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, the Glengarry Glen Ross playwright slams the so-called experts and advisors whose counsel has led to the destruction of large swaths of the U.S. economy. These people will likely never pay the price for their errors, but everyone else will, he noted. Quote, the virus here is government, or at least the incompetents who advise our rulers and cannot admit the legitimacy of dissension. Absent intervention, this virus may eventually kill the host organism. We have to trust others for their expertise, and we all make mistakes. The horror of a command economy is not that officials will make mistakes, but that those mistakes will never be acknowledged or corrected. The playwright noted that experts have issued contradictory messages about the effectiveness of masks, citing the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine that published an article saying masks are useless outside healthcare facilities, only to issue a quasi-retraction. He also cited the example of a friend who owns a restaurant and is going broke. One is permitted to sit at his tables and eat without a mask. Indeed, how would one eat while wearing one? Does the virus know that one is sitting down? Mamet compares today's coronavirus advisors to failed advisors of the past, citing the case of Professor Frederick Lindemann, a confidant to Winston Churchill during World War II. Lindemann downplayed the idea that the Germans were developing a rocket capable of bombing London, which became the V2. He was wrong, but never paid a professional price for his mistake. He also cites Joseph Stalin's science advisor, Trofim Lysenko, who came up with the idea of training crops to grow in winter. It was a disaster that contributed to mass starvation in communist Russia and China. The playwright even brings up the debate about climate change. Now we have climate change and its attendant alarmists. The news media, backed by those parts of the scientific community, the media chose to honor, presented this analysis as though it were indisputable fact. In fact, it was riddled with problems. Today, millions of people face economic ruin as the result of the coronavirus and the policies crafted by experts who are advising the government, he wrote. Quote, a pandemic was allowed to destroy the American economy. Tens of millions are driven out of work, cover their faces, and walk down the streets in fear of their neighbors. William Briggs writes today, COVID will be with us forever, so calm down. And there's an embedded tweet here from Pundit Class. Anguish and tears from a man who lost his business to the lockdown and was then arrested for the thought crime of complaining. Hans Copies had tweeted, the lack of interest in the price of panic for the young is astonishing. I do not doubt the seriousness of the epidemic, but I believe that history will look back on measures taken to contain it as a monument of collective hysteria and government folly. Pete Downey responded, exactly, Hans. It's young people's lives that are being turned upside down. To keep young people away from socializing is close to criminal. I can remember what it was like not to be able to go out in my teens, and some have the audacity to call them selfish. And who are going to lose their jobs? This story from Canada, which has become notorious around the world. Elderly woman euthanized to avoid anguish of lockdown loneliness. Good morning, doctor. Good morning, Mrs. Jones. Any updates? Yes. The good news is that we found a cure for your depression. Update. This is the kind of hysteric effeminacy we're up against. Detroit Free Press. COVID has turned breathing into a deadly adult and all of us into potential serial killers. He notes a male wrote this. He links to a piece in Capitalism magazine by Jeffrey Sharapa, The Price of Panic, How the Tyranny of Experts Turned a Crisis into a Catastrophe. Westminster President-elect tweeted, when we do the same calculation on U.S. traffic deaths in 2017, we find that these caused about 3 times as many lives of years to be lost, over 1.2 million. It's from The Price of Panic. If you drive a car, you're not loving your neighbor. The illogic of the left. It's true what Mamet says. We know what the facts are. We know who is particularly at risk from COVID-19. Fat people, unless you're very old, and then old people. These are the people who are at risk. We know that masks don't work. We know that lockdowns don't work. But do you expect that all the governments around the world, pretty much every government except Sweden and Switzerland, is going to say, we were wrong. We decided to institute policies that destroyed the economy and destroyed society. And you know what? We didn't do our homework. Starting with Professor Neil Ferguson. As soon as that guy's name was involved, we should have known this was a scam. But we didn't. So, have at us. No, that's not going to happen. These people are never going to admit that they're wrong. And I'll go back to a prediction I made, I believe, on St. Patrick's Day this year, that these people are going to wreck the economy. They are going to wreck society, and they're going to pat themselves on the back and say, it would have been much worse if we hadn't intervened, which is exactly what has happened. And we are not anywhere near the end. Oh, viruses. I was reading about the Moderna virus, and I've decided I'm not taking the Moderna virus. If they order me to take the Moderna virus, well, I suppose they're going to have to cart me off to prison, because I learned that the Moderna virus is not, it's not a vaccine, actually. What it is the genetic manipulation of your body, of your RNA. That couldn't go wrong. What if we find out that it's it's a disaster like thalidomide, that people who take it, give birth to children missing limbs? What if it turns our insides into gray goo? What if it induces, mass dementia, or, well, even crazier thinking than we're thinking right now? Well, the drug companies, they don't have to worry about that, because they have been indemnified. This is from the Daily Mail. Coronavirus was spreading in the US by December the 17th, weeks before China admitted that people there were being infected by a new virus. Antibody testing of donated blood finds. And again, this is a further evidence for my very strong belief that I had coronavirus in December. I was on Luke Ford's live stream at the time, 5 days a week, and I was sick, exceedingly sick, for about 10 days, which is unusual because I don't get colds or flu. And I had the dry hacking cough for days. I couldn't sleep. I was exhausted. I was coughing so much. I thought that, I was going to start coughing up blood or, vomit. So I think that I had COVID-19. But you've heard that from me before. Here's some good news from Chris Tomlinson at Breitbart. Priests in the French city of Lille are rejecting the French government's Wuhan coronavirus restrictions by allowing more than 30 parishioners in their churches at one time. Yeah. The cathedral, Notre Dame de l'Electoral, it hosts 1,200 people. And the government says you can allow 30 people in at a time. This is almost more insulting than saying you have to close down the church entirely. I mean, they've seen how enormous these cathedrals are in every direction, in 3 directions. But no, 30 parishioners. The Archbishop of Lille, Laurent Ulrich, spoke out against the government's restrictions, calling them arbitrary, discriminatory, and unrealistic, and told the priests under him to welcome all believers into their churches. Father Bruno Mary commented on the situation, saying, "We are not outlaws, we are just trying to be intelligent." Father Mary said that he and his colleagues took in multiple groups of 30 people into the church, which typically holds around 1,200. We organize ourselves as best we can, taking into account vulnerable people. Over the weekend, the French Council of State, France's highest administrative court, ordered the government to re-examine the restrictions on churches within 3 days after arguing that they were disproportionate. The Council of State's order comes after several protests in early November by Christians outside of churches across the country, after the government of President Emmanuel Macron introduced the 30 parishioner limit. Hundreds of protesters gathered in various cities, including as many as 600 in Versailles and 400 in Nantes over a single weekend. We follow protocols. There has not been an outbreak of contamination in churches to my knowledge. We want to assert our right to Mass. This is a matter of freedom of religion. Meanwhile, in Canada, the ever so right-wing Premier of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe, according to Canadian press, says it's too early to say whether COVID-19 restrictions will be loosened in time to allow families to gather for the holidays. Moe said residents can expect to see high COVID-19 case numbers for the next few weeks as officials wait to see if the latest public health measures have been effective. Well, one of the other things that we've learned is this PCR testing is useless, but the governments have invested so much of their credibility and so much money in this testing that they are never going to admit that they are useless. The province reported 325 new infections on Monday and says there are 123 people in hospital, 23 in ICUs. 123 people in hospital, 23 in ICUs. Does this sound like a crisis to you? It just, people don't understand numbers. They don't. Said it before, say it again. There seem to be very few people anywhere who understand any number larger than 1,000. Apparently numbers over 100 seem to terrify people. Opposition NDP leader Ryan Mealy has said that the novel coronavirus doesn't care about the holidays, and Mo is playing politics by suggesting more people might be able to gather at Christmas. We're not going to see my folks at Christmas. Oh, give yourself a hug. Pat yourself on the back. Maybe get yourself a cookie or something sweet. You are so noble. Most families aren't, and that's the wise thing to do. I hope that the Premier is going to make sure that any decision that he makes is based on the data. Yeah, the data is that there's 1.2 million people in Saskatchewan, and what are those numbers again? We have 123 people in hospital, 23 on ICUs. I can just see how that's going to wreck the health infrastructure there. From Steve Watson at Summit News, the head of the Red Cross has warned that the spread of fake news concerning vaccines could cause a second pandemic. A German news agency Deutsche Welle reports that Francesco Rocca, president of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, commented during a virtual roundtable that there is a parallel pandemic of distrust that needs to be defeated. The report notes that Rocca warned of a growing hesitancy globally toward vaccine, noting that a vaccine in and of itself will not be enough to end this pandemic. Then why are you making such a big deal about it? The vaccines were supposed to be our saviors, and now you're telling us it's going to be, second, third quarter before this madness ends? Rocca also asserted that the lack of trust in vaccines is by no means a Western phenomenon, further noting that in several African countries we have seen a common skepticism towards vaccines in general, with a common belief being that foreigners use Africa as a medical testing ground. I'm not going to disagree with that. I'm not going to disagree with that. We believe that the massive coordinated efforts that will be needed to roll out the COVID vaccine in an equitable manner need to be paralleled by equally massive efforts to proactively build and maintain trust. Massive efforts to proactively build and maintain trust. What, by threatening people who dissent? By prescribing them? We stand ready to support government efforts to roll out a COVID-19 vaccine, including by leading and supporting efforts to counteract misinformation and build trust. This is from the same source. The British government has mobilized an elite information warfare unit to combat anti-vaccine militants and interrupt their propaganda content online, according to a report in the Sunday Times. The report says that the unit is usually used to assist with operations against Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, but now will be turned on those who dare question the sanctity of COVID vaccination. The report further notes that the outfit known as the Defense Cultural Specialist Unit, boy does that sound sinister, was formed in Afghanistan in 2010 and is part of the Army's 77th Brigade. The secretive unit has often worked side by side with psychological operations teams, the report adds. Nice, Steve Watson comments, the government employing the military to use psyops on the public to ensure no one strays from the acceptable opinion on the vaccine. So one of the other vaccines, is it the Pfizer one? It has to be stored at minus 80 degrees. And how's that going to work at scale? What happens if it's not stored at minus 80? Does it spoil? Is it then useless, or perhaps worse, because I'm pretty sure that some of this is going to spoil, but I guess we'll see. This time it will be Westerners used as guinea pigs for the vaccine companies. But again, I am not accepting any vaccine which is screwing around with my genetic material. From Lockdown Skeptics, Jonathan Barr, the Labour Party is abstaining on the vote on the government's new tier system, because that's how responsible the Labour Party is. For a much more robust assessment of the cost of the lockdown and associated restrictions, we recommend this new report by Tim Knox and Jim McConnell for Civitas called The Cost of the Cure. The report is worth reading in full, but the short version is the government has spent a minimum of £96,000 for each QALY save, which is over 3 times the figure that the NHS routinely uses of 30,000 when assessing whether a particular course of action is worthwhile. If you wanted to chuckle, then imagine you had the job of the unfortunate civil servant who had been given the job of cobbling together this strange hodgepodge of information. The document is clearly a rush job, published with the political aim of persuading the growing number of Conservative MPs who are skeptical about the need for tighter restrictions that they are, in fact, necessary. There was once a time, not so long ago, when the civil service would have demurred for being involved in such a blatantly political operation. And Michael Gove, wrong about everything, but we knew that already. Peter Hitchens, in his Sunday column in the Mail on Sunday, asked or begged readers to write their MPs, telling them that you had better not vote once more for shutting down the country. Many readers have taken up Peter Hitchens' call to write to MPs, herewith a small selection from James Dellingpole to Chris Heaton Harris, a Conservative MP. Dear Chris, I never imagined that I would have to write to my local Conservative MP, politely asking him not to vote to destroy the economy, kill jobs and small businesses, and impose unprecedented restrictions on liberty, all in the name of defeating a virus no deadlier than bad seasonal flu. But this is where we are in 2020. Please don't insult my intelligence by fobbing me off with the official government line on coronavirus. We know it's bunk. You'll know it's bunk, too, if, as I hope, you've done some rudimentary research on the work of Michael Yeadon, Carl Hennigan, Sunita Gupta, and the myriad other respected scientists around the world who are bemused and frustrated by the increasingly anti-science and relentlessly anti-human and anti-prosperity measures being pursued by your government. This is not why I voted Conservative. I hereby promise that if you vote for the tier system, lockdown by any other name, I shall not vote for you in the next general election, nor will I vote Conservative on any other occasion. The policies being pursued by this government are not remotely conservative. If you believe in conservative values and the well-being and livelihoods of the people you represent, then this is the moment to take a principled stand. Thanks for all the work you've done in the past as an excellent constituency MP. And I like this one. I like this quite one here. This one was sent to Conservative MP Angela Richardson. Thank you for your email in response to mine. I fully expect you to continue following the government line. And so in the spirit of the times, I am moving you from Tier 1, a candidate I could not possibly vote for, into Tier 2, a candidate I shall actively campaign against. Nadhim Zahawi, the minister recently appointed to oversee deployment of COVID-19 vaccines, because of course you would pick someone with a name like that. They get things done in the Indian subcontinent. Never mind the whys and wherefores, but things get done. He gave an interview yesterday to BBC Radio 4's World at One. He said that while having the vaccine would not be compulsory, businesses such as pubs and restaurants might require proof that people have been vaccinated before allowing them in. I wonder about that. These businesses have been devastated by the various lockdowns. So they're going to take the position that anywhere from 30 to 50% of Britons who are not going to take the vaccine, we don't want your custom. I'm not, as I say, not so sure. The question of mandatory vaccination is, of course, an old one, and it's worth noting that immunity passports are already used in some countries to see whether people have protection against yellow fever and polio. But politics and vaccinations do not mix well, and these remarks will not sit well with the 36% of people who, according to research carried out by the British Academy, are either uncertain or very unlikely to be vaccinated against the virus. The Guardian also carries a hint of the campaign that is in preparation to persuade people to take the jab. Ministers and NHS England are drawing up a list of very sensible famous faces in the hope that their advice to get immunized would be widely trusted. Health chiefs are particularly worried about the number of people who are still undecided. I can just imagine there's going to be some black footballer and some, Asian footballer and Harry Styles wearing a dress and maybe Jesse from Little Mix. Those are the types of people that they would choose. There will be a big national campaign, said one source with knowledge of the plans. NHS England are looking for famous faces, people who are known and loved. It would be celebrities who are very sensible, like most celebrities, and have done sensible stuff during the pandemic, getting themselves photographed over and over and over again in their self-isolation. NHS communications experts suggest privately that the footballer Marcus Rashford, who is widely admired for his child food poverty campaign, and members of the royal family, politicians will not be used. I wonder if Marcus Rashford and Prince William will go so far as to get vaccinated themselves and then let us monitor them for 4 weeks to see whether there are any ill effects. Yes, you first. You first. I think Justin Trudeau in Canada should be the first in line. And I think that he should get all three of them, or as many are as available. Turns out the infection fatality rate in Norway is slightly worse than influenza, but of course influenza doesn't exist anymore. It has strangely vanished in the Western world. How about that, huh? Let's see. Check in on Alex Berenson. And he has a sad story here. My 72-year-old father dropped dead at home in Kentucky on March 30th from a heart attack. He was originally slated for life-saving heart surgery on March 18th, but due to the governor's executive order canceling elective surgeries, his doctors put a hold on the procedure. The day he died, he had walked out to the garage to look at something, and my mom later found him on the ground. Meanwhile, the hospital in Louisville, where he was to have the surgery, was empty. He left behind children and grandchildren and lots of friends, all of us shocked by the suddenness of it all. Even my 5-year-old daughter tells me regularly that she misses him. I no longer live in Kentucky and got the call from my sister a few minutes after my mom found my dad. My father was able to make it back home. My family was able to make it back home the next day. Due to restrictions, we couldn't have a proper funeral or even pallbearers. We had to bear the grief of the sudden loss of my dad largely alone. When home, I noticed the governor giving a nightly press conference, wagging his finger at the public, saying, you can't be doing that with regard to any form of social gathering. As a family, we decided to try to have a formal memorial service over the summer in July. Even then, the restrictions were ridiculous, and we could only have a short event with a limited number of people invited. We had to make difficult choices on who to invite and who not to invite. At the same time, protesters and rioters were gathering every night in Louisville, even with the governor marching with them, while still wagging his finger at us normal people for wanting to gather at times of family tragedy. The whole experience has left me angry with very little in the way of outlets to express it. What limited faith I still had in government has also eroded, as I've seen COVID used as a political tool. Many such cases, as Trump likes to say. Let's look in on the chat. Well, there has to be a coming divide in our societies, doesn't there? Between the people who are willing to accept anything and the people who are not. I believe that the people who are not willing to accept unreasonable restrictions are going to become rather more vocal, at the very least. Look at it this way. So many, social control it's a kind of bullying. And the Karens out there screaming at people, you're going to kill everybody, you're going to kill everybody. To this date, there have not been a lot of people saying, you're talking balls, shut up. You don't have the science on your side. This is just feminine hysterics. And if that type of talk were heard more often, a lot of these people who have been bullied into becoming effeminate cowards, there's a possibility that they would turn the other way. Hang on just a second. Okay, there we go. That's a little better. Okay, let's look at the chat here. Celebrity promotion. What can go wrong? Well, we've had celebrity promotion right from the very beginning. They consider this, that Tom Hanks and his wife, the actress Rita Wilson, they were the two most famous people at that time who'd had COVID-19. And where did they get it? In Australia, of all places, a country where there has been almost no COVID-19. Tom Hanks suddenly became the face and the voice for government on COVID-19 policies. I'm sure that's completely coincidental. Let's see, what is this? Dramaris? It says, watch KMG go from Angel of Light to black metal every day. Kick ass. How about that? Yakarapala says, I've already had the virus and tested positive for antibodies. If they've run out, I'd rather just get the disease again than have to get a rushed vaccine. It wasn't much different from a flu for me. What is the most reliable test? Serum? Yeah, but it's just an absolutely a complete mess. It has been from the beginning, and it's never stopped going to be a complete mess. The important numbers to me are how many people are in the hospital, how many people are in ICU, what is the death rate. Actually, death rate's difficult to calculate because it's quite possible that there's simply an enormous number of people who've been exposed to COVID-19 and herd immunity might have already been reached. But if you have people who are, people with already have respiratory problems, they have diabetes, they have heart problems, they are obese or morbidly obese. If they get a respiratory disease, well, it's often going to be very difficult and sometimes fatal. And it doesn't matter what the respiratory disease is. And that is not going to go away. Yes, therefore not much of a flu season. Yes, because everyone is locked in their homes. People are still going out to grocery stores. That much is certain. No, they're just folding in a flu with COVID-19. Worrying will shorten your life. Enjoy the day, says Hikma Warrior. Yes, that is true. No question about it. This is why speaking out is necessary, says Daniel Lutz. Absolutely. Oh, from Chokokin 666, Karen also said she hopes I die. Often with these people, you can get quite a satisfactory response by saying that you'll pray for them. It often seems that the top of their heads are going to come off. Is there something that keeps glasses defogged? Oh, I've seen this advertised, but I can't remember now, actually. Oh, it's called a fog stopper, says our valiant moderator, Chad Chadson. Okay. Dramara says, but you don't understand, old man. Sexes go this way, sexes go that way. You can't hold them back, pops. I don't actually know what that means. Okay. Worry will suppress immune response anyhow. How is that supposed to help? Yes, and excessive alcohol consumption will suppress immune response. All of the diseases that are not being treated, cancer, diabetes, many others are suppressing immune response. But again, culling the weak, that seems to be the long-term plan here. I mean, it's been rolled out. We're going to kill off the old people because they're very expensive, their medical care and their pensions. And the drug addicts, we're just going to make sure that the drug addicts get all of the drugs that they can, that they want, including exceptionally dangerous ones like fentanyl. Because, you know, if you look at the criminal costs, the justice costs, rehabilitation costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's just better for government if these people OD. And they are ODing. My province of British Columbia, many, many more people have died this year of drug overdoses from illegal drugs that have died from COVID-19. But this is rather embarrassing for the medical community. And no, it's not the genetic manipulation of your DNA, says Alex DeLarge. Well, why don't you just explain what it is without using the kind of shortcut that I used? Okay, Rain X works too, says Chad Chadson for your fog glasses. Now we're going to talk about the American election. And Attorney General Bill Barr, according to the Daily Mail, says there isn't enough evidence of voting fraud to change election result after probe into Dominion systems. But furious Rudy Giuliani claims there hasn't been any semblance of an investigation. And I'm going to go with Giuliani on this. Given that the Department of Justice has been working to overthrow Trump even before he was elected in 2016, they are rife with seditionists. And we're hearing the words martial law. This is from Jim Hoft at the Gateway Pundit. The We the People Convention published a full-page ad in the Washington Times on Tuesday calling on President Donald Trump to take extreme actions to correct controversial election results. Attorney Lynn Wood tweeted this out today. Our country is headed to civil war, a war created by third-party bad actors for their benefit, not for we the people. Communist China is leading the nefarious efforts to take away our freedom. Real Donald Trump should declare martial law. Will it come to that? What constitutes proof? What constitutes proof of electoral fraud? And Bill Barr seems to admit that there is electoral fraud, but it's not significant enough. And what would be significant enough? Is 100,000 stolen votes significant? 500,000 stolen votes? 1 million stolen votes? These are serious questions. These are serious questions. The number of, I won't even say anomalies anymore. I'm not going to use this word anomalies, but just outright blatant, brazen election stealing that has gone on and has been documented. Again, from Jim Hoft at the Gateway Pundit, Attorney Sidney Powell joined Lou Dobbs on Monday night in an explosive interview. Powell discussed the ongoing efforts to expose the massive fraud in the 2020 presidential election. During their discussion, Powell told Lou Dobbs that someone had removed a Dominion voting system server from a recount center in Fulton County, Georgia. Someone went down to the Fulton Center where the votes and the Dominion machines were, claimed there was a software glitch, and they had to replace the software, and it seems they removed the server. Powell added that her team does not know where the server is. Earlier this day, Representative Barry Loudermilk, Republican of Georgia, told Newsmax that the Fulton server was wiped clean by a Fulton County employee. Where was the FBI while all this was going on? Is it really that difficult to secure election machines? I wouldn't have thought so, but life is full of surprises. What did Lou Dobbs have to say yesterday? Brian Stelter, CNN, was he with CNN or MSNBC? Hang on a second. He's CNN. Very concerned about what Lou Dobbs had to say. This is no longer just about voter fraud or electoral fraud. This is something much bigger. Lou Dobbs said tonight, urging Trump to take drastic action because of, quote, the crimes that have been committed against him and against the American people, unquote, to which my response is Fox Alpha. This is from Summit News. An investigation into SEC filings has revealed that the firm which owns Dominion Voting Systems received $400 million from a Swiss bank with close links to the Chinese government less than a month before the election. The investigation centers on Staple Street Capital, which acquired Dominion Voting Systems in 2018. DVS operates voting machines in 28 states and has been accused by President Trump and his supporters of being involved in deleting millions of votes for Trump, in addition to switching votes to Biden on election night. On October 8, 2020, Staple Street Capital filed SEC Form D offerings and sales amount of $400 million, with the sales compensation recipient identified as UBS Securities, states the investigation, which also notes that another payment of $200 million was received in December 2014. UBS Securities is a Swiss investment bank which owns 25% of UBS Securities Company Limited, a Chinese investment bank. The remaining 75% of UBS Securities Company Limited is owned by the Chinese government. The overall owners of UBS Securities Company Limited are Beijing Guojiang, 33%, UBS, 25%, Guangdong Communications Group, 14%, China Guodian, 14%, and the COFCO Group, 14%. Aside from UBS, the other four owners of UBS Securities are all communist Chinese front groups. This is interesting to me, and it's alarming because I knew of UBS as a Swiss financial institution, and I would have assumed that something called UBS Securities Companies Limited would be, in fact, a Swiss company, but it turns out that it is not, that it is Chinese, communist Chinese. Here's a big story from yesterday. Breaking: Dominion representative caught at Gwinnett County Election, Central Georgia, responsible for tabulating ballots and certifying results, downloading data to USB from the election management server, plugging it into a laptop, manipulating the data, and then palming the UBS. This is from Newsmax. Republicans in the Pennsylvania General Assembly formally introduced a joint resolution Monday declaring the general elections results in dispute and reserving the power to designate presidential elections for the Electoral College. Again from Newsmax, President Trump's campaign filed a lawsuit in Wisconsin Tuesday claiming the absentee voting process was abused in the states. The suit seeks to disqualify more than 221,000 ballots in the state's two most Democrat-heavy countries. The lawsuit comes after the state completed its partial recount and after Governor Tony Evers on Monday night formally certified Joe Biden as the state's winner. Whistleblowers come forward from Cassandra Fairbanks at Gateway Pundit. New election fraud whistleblowers came forward on Tuesday, including one who witnessed the shipping of an estimated 144,000 to 288,000 completed ballots across 3 state lines on October 21st. The new information was made public at a press conference by the Amistad Project of the Thomas More Society, a national constitutional litigation organization. At the press conference, it was announced that they have contacted law enforcement about their findings. Evidence provided by the whistleblowers is being used in litigation by the Amistad Project to ensure election integrity and to uphold election laws in key battleground states, including Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So what does Vox Populi... Gina Haspel, the director of the CIA, just incredible stories floating around about her yesterday, that she had been wounded in a special forces attack at a server farm in Frankfurt, Germany, that she'd been killed, or alternately that she had been arrested and charged with treason and is now in Guantanamo Bay, singing like a canary. Obviously, I can't vouch for any of this, but this is the type of talk that typically accompanies a regime which is on the verge of total collapse. Vox Day, Swamp activates AG Barr. This is either 4D strategery by the White Hats or pure desperation on the part of the deep state, which is rapidly running out of assets to activate. This is Barr's contention that there has been an investigation by the FBI Department of Justice and nothing significant has been found. Vox Day comments, well, it's certainly true the Justice Department has steadfastly refused to see any evil or evidence. That's only because they are making the proverbial three monkeys look like the three investigators. And then he mentions one of the stories that I just read from. Remember, Q said we're watching a movie. I don't vouch for Q, but I'll repeat this anyway. The betrayal of the hero by a trusted henchman usually takes place in the second act. The third one should be a good one. The thing is, Generation X knows the answer to defeating the monster. You just refuse to believe him. Anyhow, as always, wait at least 2 days before even trying to figure out what actually is going on. This is why they say there is no evidence, Vox Day writes, because they're desperately trying to destroy all of it. If at this point you still don't understand that Biden lost, you're simply not paying attention. Hard drive shredding truck shows up to Georgia elections machines facility. It can shred machine parts, server drives, USBs, etc. People are calling for the arrest of Governor Kemp and the FBI asleep on the job. Judges and Kemp seem complicit with crime. First, Ratzensperger shredded what seemed to be millions of ballots over hours of a lady videotaping them several times before police arrived. Now they are sending e-waste trucks to do the shredding the hard drives. Wow, massive crime going on here for all to see. Very obvious. Eric Trump highlights the statistical improbabilities of the fraudulent 2020 election. Biden lost 212 more counties than Obama did in 2012. Biden won 477 counties versus Obama, who won 689. Yet Biden magically gained 13 million more votes than Obama. Please. Another smoking gun. Watch a Dominion representative at Gwinnett County Election Central responsible for tabulating ballots and certifying results download data to USB from the election management server, plug it into a laptop, manipulate the data, then palm the USB. Not convinced he is a Dominion representative? Well, let's take a close look at his badge. So much for certification. The Arizona State Legislature does not appear to be impressed by the Secretary of State's decision to certify the election results while the ongoing hearings were proving the massive amount of vote fraud that took place in this state. Schumer wants the Senate to vote to confirm Biden's cabinet right now, ASAP, yesterday if possible. What's the rush, Chuck? And finally, reference again to Gina Haspel. I'll repeat this again. If it is true that Dominion voting systems machines were communicating with an installation in Frankfurt, Germany, this should be sufficient just by itself for the election to be voided and for a new election to be held. Because there is no possible reason for this to happen other than fraud. No possible reason. Oh, let's go to J5 Killer, see what he has to say. Catherine Herridge at CBS had tweeted, Election 20 results from a DOJ spokesperson. Some media outlets have incorrectly reported that the department has concluded its election of election fraud and announced an affirmative finding of no fraud in the election. This is not what the Associated Press reported, nor what the Attorney General stated. The department will continue to receive and vigorously pursue all specific and credible allegations of fraud as expeditiously as possible. J5 Killer responded, here you go, fraud investigation ongoing at the DOJ. Sad Piano Noises had tweeted, I haven't been as confident as you have been with all this. However, even assuming a complete loss in all this, there's quite a justification for complete and utter resistance to a Biden administration, including things like mass trucking strikes and whatever else. J5 Killer responds, even if Trump loses, he won't. It's still not over. If you thought the last 4 years were fun, just wait until you're part of the resistance, fighting tooth and nail against the bumbling Biden administration. Friends, get this through your heads. The fight never ends. Even if you win the battle, all you get is a short respite while the next fight is being teed up. There is no happily ever after. There is only the grind and shock of politics and war. You fight because you can make things better for yourself and your kids, but one day they'll have to fight too. Be the happy warrior when your time to fight comes. Golden ages only last so long. I want to talk about capital punishment. Capital punishment was abolished in most of the Western world in the 1960s. It still exists in the United States, but it's heavily restricted by the courts. What it typically takes 10 to 15 years or more for someone sentenced to death to be executed. And of course, it's banned in many states. One of the reasons why capital punishment was abolished was because of the solemn promise that those people found guilty of first-degree murder would spend the rest of their natural lives in prison. The argument was made that this was even worse than the death penalty, and that's not really outlandish thing to say. But we started to hear, not long after capital punishment was in fact abolished, that, well, we can't keep these people in prison forever. Well, why not? That's exactly what you promised. Well, it's very expensive, and these people get very sick. After what Sirhan has been in prison in California since 1968, to give the most famous example in the United States, 52 years for killing Senator Robert Kennedy. Now, another argument is made that long prison sentence, very long prison sentences, constitute cruel and unusual punishment. And I think that is a very strong argument indeed. The modern prison system has only existed, 120 years or so. People were not kept in prison except for debts in the past for, obvious reasons. That is very, very cruel to these prisoners, where they are constantly being told, your next parole hearing is coming up. There used to be this show on A&E, could have been called Parole Hearings or whatever. And you would see these people getting ready for the parole hearings. And I remember there was this old black guy. He'd been in prison something like about 13, 14 years. He'd killed someone in a bar fight. And he was asked this question, do you think about what you did to the man you killed? And he said, I think about it every single day. And I thought, well, he's lying. But these are sort of lies that you have to memorize. And he wasn't thought to be sufficiently sincere in his ruefulness for what he had done. Again, this is exceedingly cruel. I argue that it would be less cruel to simply execute people. It gives them an opportunity to make restitution to God for what they have done. This was brought to mind by a horrifying story in the Mail on 28th of November. This is an Irish name that I don't know that I can pronounce, but I'm just going to give it a go here. Myreed Philpott has been released from prison after serving less than half her 17-year sentence for killing her 6 children in a fire. The 38-year-old, who killed her children after burning down the family home in Derby in 2012, was delighted at being given her earliest possible release date. She was taken from Her Majesty's Prison Send in Surrey to a halfway house yesterday after just 8.5 years behind bars, The Sun reported. News of her imminent release was slammed by the Center for Crime Prevention think tank, which said this is not justice. The taxpayer will cover thousands of pounds worth of costs for Philpott to stay in a hostel with a new identity. Mick Philpott led Myreed and the couple's friend Mosley in what was a scheme to get a bigger council house by burning down his Derby home and framing ex-lover Lisa Willis for the crime. His intention was to rescue the sleeping children through an upstairs window, but the plan went disastrously wrong, and the blaze claimed the lives of Dwayne, 13, Jade, 10, John, 9, Jack, 7, Jesse, 6, Jaden, 5. To give you an idea how stupid these people are, apparently they don't know that John and Jack are the same name, that Jack is a nickname for John. This is how dim-witted these people are. So the children all died from smoke inhalation. Initially, the couple received an outpouring of sympathy and wept at a press conference as they appealed for help to find the killer or killers, but their behavior later aroused suspicions, and the pair were subsequently charged alongside Mosley. At Mick Philpott's sentencing, the judge described the plot as a wicked and dangerous plan that was outside the comprehension of any right-thinking person. She said there was no precedent for the case, describing it as a uniquely grave set of offenses. The Philpotts and Mosley were found guilty of manslaughter. Mick was sentenced to life in prison and married, and Mosley to 17 years. The killer couple divorced after being jailed. The father of 17, who married Marie in 2003, used his children to drag in an astonishing £60,000 a year in benefits. Philpott, who had previously been jailed for stabbing his schoolgirl lover 27 times, wove a web of lies trying to get away with the crime and even plotted to get rich quick off generous donations from the local community meant to pay for the funerals of his children. So let's review the bidding here. A couple decides to burn down their house with their 6 young children in it in furtherance of fraud and to pin these killings on someone innocent. And the woman gets 8.5 years in prison. Of course, in the United States, this would be considered, and there's a similar law in Canada, this would be considered, what they call a felony murder. But no, this is justice in Great Britain. It's a similar case in Canada that came up last week. It's from the CBC. The man who killed 6 people in a Quebec City mosque in 2017 received a cruel and unusual punishment when he was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 40 years, Quebec's Court of Appeal ruled Thursday. In a unanimous decision, the court reduced Alexandre Bissonnette's life sentence to 25 years without parole, while at the same time invalidating sections of the criminal code that allow judges to hand out consecutive life sentences for murder. Another example of our critarchy, simply letting Canadians know that we do not live in a representative democracy. A spokesperson for the mosque where the attack took place said he was dismayed by the decision to lighten Bissonnette's sentence. We would have liked a definitive sentence to prevent other attacks from taking place, said Boufelja Benabdallah, a founder of the Quebec Islamic Cultural Center. We're not thinking of only ourselves, but of all Quebec society. The court's decision to invalidate the consecutive sentencing provisions in the criminal code applies only in Quebec. But if appealed, it opens the door to a possible Supreme Court of Canada ruling on the sentencing provisions that Stephen Harper's Conservative government introduced in 2011. Now, this mass killing by Bissonnette in 2017 was mysterious then and remains mysterious now. There was no trial, which is very unusual in cases like this, because typically it becomes a show trial. And you would have heard the Crown talk about the evil of right-wing websites, including quite possibly websites that have been mentioned on this show, with a very strong message that if you read any of these websites, you are a killer in embryo. But again, there was no trial, which raises suspicions. In any event, there doesn't seem to be any doubt that Alexandre Bissonnette killed 6 people in this mosque in Quebec City. And this is the very sort of crime that, of course, he'll spend life in prison. No, he's not going to spend life in prison. Apparently, he's going to spend 25 years at the maximum, and that could change and be reduced in the future. It is cruel and unusual punishment to hold someone in prison for 25 or for 40 years. There's no question in my mind about that. Albert Speer, in his Spandau Diaries, came to the conclusion he'd spent 20 years at Spandau. that 5 years was the maximum amount of time that a man could spend in prison without being wrecked mentally. But we do that. We do that because, well, we can't execute people apparently anymore. But this just leads to these kinds of horrific stories, two of which I've just read to you, that we say, oh, well, we don't need capital punishment because we're going to keep people in prison for the rest of their lives. But we're not keeping people in prison for the rest of their lives unless they are, notorious, like a Sirhan, or, I don't know, Jim Gordon, the legendary drummer who wrote the second part of Layla, who was schizophrenic, who killed his mother in 1983 and has been in California state prisons since 1983. Let's go back to the chat. YT says, unfortunately, no one wants to void the election, obviously. Yo Mama says there's no constitutional mechanism for holding a new election. I believe this is in the law. It's called force majeure. Anron says, Kevin, it's December now. Aren't you concerned time is running out for Trump? I believe a certain online college president thinks so. Oh, I don't know. He's got till January the 20th in terms of, declaring a national emergency and martial law. Again, the stuff that we have seen in terms of fraud, does it need to be quantified? That an exact number of ballots were illegal or exact number of votes were shifted? Because it's going to be very difficult to exactly quantify that. You see this again and again in the so-called swing states, battleground states, that there is extraordinarily strong prima facie evidence of fraud. And as I joked yesterday, pretty soon the Biden supporters are going to be saying, hey, we stole it fair and square. That you don't. There's a question of propriety here. Very serious question of propriety. You do not let voting machines disappear. You do not send trucks which can grind up metal, grind up voting machines, grind up USBs, grind up hard drives. You do not send these to voting centers, do you? Not if you want the people to believe that there was a fair election. But the Democrats don't care, and the media doesn't care. The elite doesn't care at all. They got the result that they wanted. I mean, Joe Biden's already falling apart. He can't speak. He talks of the palmist, But again, there's going to be a decent interval before he's shuffled off, and Kamala Harris? Have they thought this through? What the psychological consequences would be, the absolute rage if six months or a year after Biden is inaugurated, he disappears, and Kamala Harris, whose campaign didn't even last to the Iowa caucuses, becomes president of the United States. David Wright says, I appreciate the white pillars, but at some point they sound like Charlie Sheen winning. Jaco Rapala says, during the Russian Empire, Finland sentenced people to death, but the Tsar would convert every death sentence to permanent exile to Siberia, better than the early releases of murderers that we do now. Permanent? I know a lot of people were exiled to Siberia. Dostoevsky, to give one example. These, so many of the communists, the anarchists, the bomb throwers, they were exiled to Siberia. A great many of them managed to make it back, and a lot of them escaped. Imagine that. Escaping from a prison camp in Siberia. That's a tall order. Never trust a drummer, says Jonathan Paul. Yes, it was a whole bunch of fraud. Yes. That, okay, the election was probably stolen, but can you prove it? Do you really want to be making that argument? Because you're making that kind of argument, then all bets are off. Jaakko Rapala says, yeah, there was a notorious multiple murderer who walked back to Finland from Siberia. He killed some people on the way while stealing food. I didn't get around to talking about Klaus Schwab's book today, but I will tomorrow. That's a promise. What's coming up on the show on Theater Thursday? I don't know, a Black Pill movie. Is it a Black Pill movie? I'm not going to tell you what the ending of Terry Gilliam's Brazil is, but it can be interpreted in two different ways. And on the book club, a white pill book, actually, an exceedingly, it's a beautiful book and quite moving. It's called Tragic Sense of Life by Miguel de Unamuno. That's the show for today. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you'd click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already done so. If you'd like to contribute a donation to this live stream, greatly appreciated, especially at this time of year. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send a donation directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.